Let's go.
Is Lisa here?
Yeah, that's going. Let's double check. Yeah, we're recording.
Is Lisa here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I actually put a couple notes down on like what we should be talking about, and honestly, like even stuff like this, I'd say we leave it in and just
Oh,
let
yeah.
let it ride.
Yeah.
But
It's okay if I put my stuff here.
yeah, absolutely, sure.
Right?
You know, it's Did you watch that Joe Rogan video I sent you? Did you ever see that? His very first
Oh,
podcast.
and they just started.
Yeah. So like my biggest takeaway from that, and I'm trying to think the first time I saw one of his podcasts. I don't know how long's he been around. I mean, he's been around for a lot of years now. Like
Survivor, wasn't he on Survivor?
No, Fear Factor.
Fear Factor.
Oh yeah, Did you watch that? I used to watch that.
Well, when he started a podcast, that's the first thing that came to mind. Why is this Fear Factor guy on TV?
Yeah.
I remember he was also into like the fighting, the UFC. Wasn't he like?
Yeah, he still is. He's
Okay.
still into
Like,
UFC.
yeah.
Yeah, he
What was first? It was one.
I think it was Fear Factor.
Okay.
I don't know about that because you're right, because I think he might have been a fighter in the UFC, and that's how he ended up. I mean, this is the kind of thing we could look up pretty easily, but I believe like UFC stuff and the Fear Factor stuff, like when he was actually fighting, was about the same time. And now he's a commentator, so he'll go to UFC fights and.
Oh, he actually fought.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think so. But he, and to be honest, like this is kind of, I didn't have a great familiarity with him other than the fact that I knew him from Fear Factor, and I didn't even know. I remember being at my first job up in Pennsylvania, and I bumped into him. Someone like said like watch this, and I started watching it, and it was just interesting. And I think he inadvertently like hit on a scheme. Like he's almost credited for bringing out the long form interviews.
Oh yeah.
So like up until that point, we were all just being subjected to news sound bites, and it was like gotcha moments, like people like trying to one up each other, and like you have like a 1 minute segment, fight it out,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like it solves anything.
Yeah.
So then YouTube comes along, and at that point, I was already into YouTube. Like I already suddenly like was just so aware of how much potential YouTube had. So I was just trying to find stuff that interested me and like people talking through things. And at the same time, he's like, he's just bumping into the fact that he doesn't care. Like we shouldn't care. Like we're just gonna sit here, relax.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things they discovered was that it takes a while for people to relax in front of a camera and actually let the conversation flow.
Yeah.
So like at first you're kind of tense.
I'm actually mindful right now.
Yeah, and I think
of trying to not think about the camera.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to force myself. Okay, don't think about the camera. Don't think about the camera. But I mean, I can still have the conversation. But it's interesting because as comfortable as I feel in front of the camera, I'm still telling myself, don't think about the camera.
Yeah.
But the farthest back, I this is not a true podcaster, but I think like the original podcaster would probably be like Howard Stern. You remember?
Yeah.
It was kind of like a podcast, even though it was his radio, but there was a camera, the Howard Stern show showing him.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing. It was long form, guest.
I remember being into Howard Stern for a little while, and I think, I mean, I was aware of him, but then what was the name of his movie came out? Private Parts or something like that. And yeah, that was like, he was very controversial at the time.
Yeah.
And man, he's changed. Like he's become like such a mouthpiece for, like he's so politically charged right now.
Oh yeah.
And he's kind of like lost his compass when it comes to, he was so countercultural when he first started. Like, if this is the thing you're not allowed to say, he was the one that was going to say it.
He's not like that.
No,
he's he now?
He probably still feels he is like that. I don't know. He's got to be like in his 60s, I'd say. I mean, I don't know. He might even be like pushing 70.
Yeah, I think he's older.
And right now the talking heads on YouTube that are analyzing his stuff and sharing it are really focusing in on the fact that he's gone literally from, hey, I'm trying to investigate and understand what's going on, to like, almost like propaganda, where he's very one-sided. He's part of the machine now. Like he's basically part of the elites, and I think, it's changed a lot of people. I think one of the things that impacted him was COVID. So he really came down hard on the idea that there was more than one opinion about COVID. And I could be wrong. Like it might go back further, but I think that was like a little bit of a turning point for a lot of people, where like once they drew a line in the sand, they were either on one side or the other. And once they decided they were on that one side, they were all in. And he's still there.
Also, times have changed a lot since when Howard Stern was counterculture.
Yeah. Right.
It could be that the times we're in now are still too far for him. Like,
Yeah, that's actually a good point too, because when I was growing up, the push when it came to free speech was, allowing things that were lewd or vulgar. So I remember, and you might remember this too. So you'd go buy a cassette tape or a CD, and it had that parental advisory on it.
Yeah.
And there was like a huge fight at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like conservative, like Republicans, that were like trying to shut down the availability of this vulgar, either like gangster rap or whatever lewd content. And so in their minds, a lot of people's minds, like they were the freedom fighters. They were fighting for liberty and free speech. And we do live in a strange time because that has flipped. But if you're okay with it, what I'd like to actually ask is for us to talk about. It's just like,
really quick, Adam, you have enough storage and battery?
Yeah,
I mean the battery's plugged in. Storage?
Yeah, I think it should be fine.
Okay.
We'll find out.
Okay.
Well, I'll check it here in a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it's going. It should be all right.
So what was your question?
Oh, no, where was I going with that? So I kind of wanted to talk about specifically this podcast. So you kind of segued into it. I mean, me personally, like, I don't know what you've been thinking about, but like one of the things I've been thinking about is like, all right, well, I fully expect this particular video to get like sub 20 views, right? And probably half of those are going to be us reviewing it, right? So that's all the more reason to allow us to let our hair down and be casual, because no one's going to see it.
No one's going to see it.
Unless something takes off sometime in the future, and then someone might come back and say, hey, what did these guys put out for the first time around, and this is it. And
highly critical of Howard Stern. You're highly critical.
Yeah, right.
Look at him now.
And so, like, me at this point, so we've known each other for a couple years now, right? Like at least a year, at least a little over a year.
At least a year,
yeah.
Probably closer to 2.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, like, I expect a lot of our conversation to be overtly Christian, because we're both Christians. We both believe in the Bible. So it's like, I don't think there's going to be any excuses for making sure that that's a strong part of the conversation.
Right.
But I want to be able to talk about anything.
Yeah, me too.
And in my personal life, I have a tendency to be pretty open about stuff. So I do anticipate, or at least I'm going to be trying to be a little bit measured. And while we're having these conversations, it's like, one of the things I'm thinking is like, all right, would Lisa be proud of what I say? Like, will my wife be proud of what I'm talking about and how I'm talking about it? And
I think that's a good metric.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair metric,
Yeah. And I mean, that means things like, well, all right, well, I want to share stories, and I want to share about my experience for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
And I also want to think about, like, if I'm talking about something controversial, I think about people that I like work with that believe differently, or different political beliefs. And it's like, well, how would I approach them? with this. If I have the opportunity to have this conversation with somebody, how would I approach them? Like I wouldn't be, you know, I wouldn't be bombastic. I wouldn't, you know, I'd try to be more empathetic and be gracious. And I think the other part of it too is just like measuring out how much I talk about personal things. Like even, you know, I don't intend to talk about like exactly what I do for a living, but I'll talk about the fact that I like technical things. Like I'm more of an engineer. I've been in the same kind of business for 30 years, but I'll probably like talk through it. But you know, like I want to, if that makes sense, like try to be a little more general on some topics. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that.
I'm okay with that. I think when I first said, hey, we should start a podcast, it was stemming off of the fact that you and I have great conversations.
Yeah.
Right? We have great conversations with the guys, with the groups that we're in, but also in private, like when we went to eat at Culver's and, you know, even here when we kind of have our side conversations. And I thought it'd be great that some of these conversations get recorded, right? But I like the fact that our conversations are real, you know?
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and we can't lose that.
I don't want to lose that authenticity of how you and I relate to each other, right? And of course, I don't think I've ever spoken with you with crass or,
No.
you know. So I'll just continue having the same conversation with you. But I was willing to be not disrespectful. I'm not going that far wide, but I'm willing to push a little bit the envelope and the conversation where it's like have some transparency, show some vulnerability of how I think and who I am as a person, and you know I'm okay with somebody disagreeing. Not too extreme, but if we ever get there, we could just edit it out. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think we would want to err on the side of leaving it in.
Yeah.
Like I think, I mean,
Well, I would say that if you say something like, you know what, George, I don't know, I'm not. I said it. I got caught in the moment because of our conversation, and now I think about maybe this person at my job. You know, I don't want to offend them because I already have this outside.
Like I didn't say it in a way that was I'd be proud of.
Right, and then it's like, you know, do you mind if we cut this off? Of course, let's cut it off.
But I almost feel too like, just for the sake of keeping it real, if we find ourselves in a position like that, and I mean, let's face it, I don't think we have a ton of risk because you're right. Like, you're not modifying your behavior for this. I'm not modifying my behavior. I'm just trying to tweak it a little bit. It's like, I think in general, most of the people that know both of us
think similarly.
Yeah, and well, I guess what I'm trying to think of is like their perception of us. So, right or wrong, I think, and hopefully this is true, like most people I think would view us as being gracious and willing to listen and, you know, not just take the first opportunity where someone says something we disagree with and you know, ream them out for being wrong. You know, like we're willing to ask questions and be probing and be humble about it, and never perfectly. Like, I've had conversations where I walk away and it's like, man, I wish I had a redo. Like, I wish I hadn't gone off that way. But that's just a human experience, and I think that's gonna come out.
And I think that's what would be appreciated by, let's say, our closest friends who see this would appreciate the fact that it's very human. Like, you know what I mean? Because I think everybody has a bit of not a facade, but like a little bit of a filter in larger groups versus more intimate groups, right?
Right.
And even within our intimate groups, the less people involved, the more open we are, right? You know?
Well, yeah.
So it's kind of like inviting them in. It's like, okay, I'm probably gonna say something that you thought of, right? But you were probably timid to say, and now you're hearing Adam say it, and you're glad, and you agree, and you might also go into work and someone says, hey, you know that thing you said, that's great. Right. And then you thought, oh, I thought I was gonna offend him, and now that barrier is broken, the ice is broken. It's like, okay, we're not so robotic and distant. We can actually have some disagreeing point of views and still have warmth to it.
Right, right. No, I completely agree. Um, yeah, I had a thought, and I'll think about. Actually, let me double check that. Make
Yeah,
sure it's
check.
still recording.
Yeah.
And then I'll think about it for a second. It looks good. We're 15 minutes in.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. Oh, and I guess that actually does remind me. So,
Time constraint?
well, I don't have a time constraint. I mean, I kind of anticipated this being anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours. Like
Yeah,
I had
same with me.
no
Same with
no
me. That's what I
no
thought.
yeah, no time constraint. But one of my interests for us personally, like as much as I anticipate that this really doesn't go anywhere, other than like we're putting it out there, like that's the risk. Like we're gonna make it out there for public consumption.
Yeah.
But like in my heart, I believe that this one's gonna go like nowhere.
No, of course not.
And
Yeah.
so with that being said, like one of the biggest takeaways I want is, for us to be able to review this video afterwards and just be okay with ourselves. Like to watch it and be like, okay, this is how we talk to each other. Like I fully anticipate, because I'm probably a little more of a talker than you, that I have to be conscientious. You ever watch Jordan Peterson interviews? Are you familiar with him?
Yeah. Not kind of, not really.
Yeah, so I mean, he's definitely a very well known, famous or notorious person at this point because of how he came to notoriety. Not even that long ago, like eight years ago. I think 2016 is when he came onto the scene, and I actually watched his first where he conducted the interview, and he's a clinical psychologist from Canada, and he
Oh, I think I know what you're talking
yeah,
Yeah.
he's the one that got himself like labeled as a misogynist and a homophobic person because he countered a bill in Canada that was like I mean, from his own perspective, it's a compelled speech law, basically forcing professionals to honor people's pronouns. And he just came out and said, like, well, this is completely anti-Western. This goes against everything we believe in. So people labeled him as, someone who was trying to take people's rights away. And I mean, he had protests that cropped up on college campus because he was a professor. But anyway, like through that whole process, and I'm sure in the future, like we'll talk about people like that. And I'm hoping that's the kind of stuff we talk about is like just who are the, and I say this, like who are the thought leaders of our time, and what are they up to? Where did they come from? And interestingly enough, because we were talking about Joe Rogan, his first attempt at an interview was him interviewing Joe Rogan, and it was a really clunky interview, but you could probably find it. And Joe Rogan was so gracious because like at that point in time, Joe Rogan had him on his podcast several times, and Joe Rogan was like his first guest on his own podcast. But if you know Jordan Peterson at all, like when he does an interview, like he's interviewing people, but like a lot of the interview is him talking about psychoanalyzing or discussing whatever's being discussed. So anyway, that's where I'm like, I understand that I'll probably fill a lot of air, and it's like, all right, so make sure there's a good
balance.
Good balance.
Going back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also see myself like, how in our group, sometimes we're having a conversation, and you'll say a word or a phrase or a term, and the guys make a joke like, "Oh, I gotta pull out the dictionary." I can represent that question. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so what does compelled speech mean?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh,
Even if I know it.
Yeah.
Even if I know it, ask it, because
yeah.
I might not really know it how I think I know it, and you might be able to explain it better, and then whoever's watching can understand the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, and this is where I think like having the open book test is going to be important too, just because I think if we find ourselves maybe unsure in certain territory, we can look it up. But I mean, yeah, we could talk about anything. And I don't know, like that's almost like to me like a future state. And I would want to talk about compelled speech, but I don't know if I'd want to go down that rabbit trail right now. Are you familiar with what he was talking about? Yeah, it's worth looking up. You should look it up sometime. There's a couple uh, good interviews. One's for the history books, if you ask me, where he's talking to journalists. One of them was what's her name, Kathy Newman in England. I think it was in England, and she was a really hostile interviewer. But it was the interview that really put him on the map. And her I'll probably paraphrase it here a little bit, but her question to him was basically like, what gives you the right to interfere with someone's right to not be offended? So like she framed it in a way, it's like people have a right not to be offended. And and maybe I should back up. So the whole concept of the bill C-16 was you could get a fine attached to you if uh, if you misgendered somebody. So if someone's in the classroom, and this is hypothetical, like this never happened to them, but hypothetically speaking, with Bill C-16, and as far as I know, it's still an active law in Canada. Canada's done some strange things. Um, if you misgender, so someone's presenting as a female, but they're a male, you know it, and you still call them a he or a him, like you would be violating Bill C-16, especially if they would like tell you, no, my pronouns are she, her. And if he just continued to use his assumption on what their biological sex was, Bill C-16 puts teeth behind it and says that you can get fined or lose your profession for offending someone through misgendering them. So at this point, he's starting to like raise his voice to say, this is a compelled speech law, which means that you're not just telling me what I can't say, which is bad enough. You're telling me what I have to say. Like you're forcing the words out of my mouth, and basically he's saying this is no good. I mean, if we're going to be a free society, a thoughtful society, the most important thing we can protect is free speech. And when you're protecting free speech, you're protecting speech which is offensive. And she basically said, well, what gives you the right to interfere with somebody's right, quote unquote, right not to be offended? And he's like, well, you seem like you're perfectly within your right to offend me, because you're sitting here digging and you're making me uncomfortable. So what gives you the right to do that? And he right away defends her. He's like, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Like you're digging a little bit. Like you have the right and the freedom to interfere with what may offend me. And all of a sudden she like stops and realizes that he's right.
Yeah.
And she didn't like say it. I mean, she just paused long enough to make it clear that there was a thought rattling around in her brain that she wasn't expecting. And he's like, I gotcha. And the conversation kind of moved on from there, but that was like one of those clippable viral moments. Yeah, exactly. And it was cool. Like, I mean, I'm in some ways like, we live in these crazy times, and I'm really honored in some ways to be a part of it, because it's like some of these key things that propelled certain people into notoriety. Like it's cool. Like I was there just because I was curious. Like I was on YouTube. Like I was so hungry for just conversations, and like it didn't take me long to realize like I'm not into sports. There's a lot of things I don't do. I don't have like elaborate hobbies that take up a bunch of my time, but I became an information junkie. And as soon as YouTube came on the scene, it's like, oh, okay, like, well, what's here that's useful? And when I started bumping into meaningful conversations or people that could help explain concepts or ideas that I kind of had half baked in my mind, and it's like, well, I didn't have to put the energy into figuring it out on my own. This other person already figured it out, and they could explain it. And they did it in a format that was useful to me. Do you read? Are you a book reader?
I am.
Okay. How many books do you think you read? Like paper?
Paper
Like
books,
you,
yeah.
you do like the traditional on paper books?
Yeah.
All right. Wow, man. Shoo, you're an old soul. So like on average, and I don't know, you can guess a little bit. Like say in a year, how many books do you think you read?
In a year, probably anywhere from 3 to 5 books in a year.
Is it like a particular genre? Like are you into novels or?
No, they pretty mixed. Christian books, philosophical books, business books.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. Like some of your, I mean, obviously we're gonna want to talk about the philosophical and the religious books. I mean, we're gonna definitely want to park there and spend time with those.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of curious, like what kind of business
Bible
books?
studies, like things like that. A little bit of sci-fi here and there. Usually when someone recommends a book or passes it along or says, hey, I'm done with this book. It's about this, this, and that. You interested? Yeah. And then I add it to the pile.
Okay.
The pile right next to my toilet.
Oh, okay. All right.
Under the cabinet.
So every once in a while, one will like find its way into your backpack and
Yeah.
it like goes with you and you'll
No, I read it on
or-
the toilet.
Nice.
So I have different piles.
Well, all right. So now, how long does it like? I don't know. Like, how far can you? How fast of a reader are you?
No, well, I can read fast, but I don't dedicate like a chapter.
Yeah. But I mean, does it allow you enough time to like get through a book in a reasonable amount of time?
No. So what I do is I have a lot of books,
Okay.
and I cross read them. Like I won't just finish one before I move on to
All
the
right.
next. I'll read one, and then I'll put it in the bottom. It's a little OCD-ish, but
Yeah.
I do the same thing with my clothes. Like I'll recycle. Like if I just wore this shirt, I'll put it in the back of the
So
closet.
it doesn't get reused too soon.
Exactly. I do the same with books. So I'll just take the top book, read it. I have some Spanish books too that my father gave me. Some like Spanish literature, like romantic novels of like historical eras and stuff, Colombian writers. And so I'll take the book and just read it and put it in the bottom, right? And so that's my bathroom pile. Those are the ones that I'm not really diving into like right away. And then in my living room, I have my pile of like, okay, these books I want to make sure I either get them out the way fast because I'm really into it's in this book. I want to learn it. I want to acquire this knowledge. Or
Like they get promoted.
yeah, they get promoted, or they have to be returned to its owner.
Your
pretty
books
soon.
are like, yay! I'm no longer in the bathroom.
Or they have to get returned to their owner. Someone lend me the book.
Okay.
So
And
I
then
don't
you'll
hold
finish
on
it.
for it too long. And if they get promoted. So if the under the sink ones are really captivating, then I say, you know what, I'm gonna go take this one to the living room and probably dedicate a little bit more time to it. Not everything I believe are things that everything I read are things that I believe or
Yeah.
and
And that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly think that's good.
Yeah.
Because you should like understand how those things last. Well, so there's a reason why I asked you this. So first off, I appreciate it, and it's actually kind of cool that you have a traditional diet of how you consume information via books.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. So I'm like the polar opposite. So I honestly can't remember the last time I read a book. So like I have reference books. I have some things like I just, and this is almost just for the audience to understand. I want to have a bookshelf and I want to have a bunch of paper copy of books. Like I think the internet is great. Like we're in a heyday, or I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but it's like a great time for the internet. Like it's at its peak in some ways, and like downloading audio books and
It's funny. I still order physical books from Amazon.
yeah, and I mean I think that's interesting, and I want to have a strong library of paper copy books, and I think a lot of the books that I want to have on hand are reference books. Different versions of the Bible are obviously important to me, and reference books for the Bible. But I just recently bought a set of encyclopedias that were the same year as what I had when I was doing my paper route when I was 12 years old. So it's kind of cool. So there's like a nostalgic aspect to it, and so I like flip through it. But like my consumption of information is almost all audio and video. And I actually had a buddy, or have a buddy that I used to work with. He was funny. He had a really good sense of humor, but he looked down on me because I did audiobooks. He's like, you can't do that. He's like, you have to read the books. You have to have like the paper. And it's like, well, what's to that? Like, is it actually reading the book? And I don't know, maybe like a really strong book nerd is going to watch this and be like, yeah, Adam, like you're just not getting the same experience unless you actually are reading it and digesting it on the page. But what I've come to realize, at least for myself, is that there are books now that I've read dozens of times, like the same book, because it generated enough interest in a topic. And business books are a big one, or like faith books about Christianity or other religions. You know, if I listen to them and they resonate with me, they get into a repeat mode. So I can probably list, you know, maybe 5 or 10 books that I've listened to so many times that if they weren't digital, I would have worn them out.
Okay, gotcha. I with me, if I get an, you're gonna check.
Yeah, go ahead. Just keep talking. We'll I just want to make sure it's still. Yeah,
like
we're
I
good.
was saying, Adam. I don't think it makes a difference whether it's an audiobook or physical book.
Yeah, and that's where I land.
For me, it's that there's just something about holding the book, opening the page,
Yeah.
folding so I can leave a bookmark.
Right.
Tactile makes me remember it, makes me make sure I come back to it. Okay. I'm not really great with keeping up with digital stuff. You know, my friends make fun of me like you're not living in the 21st century, or
Right.
Are we in the 21st?
Yeah, sure we are.
21st, right?
Time's flying. But
For a reason, I thought it was
going that
2100. And if I get an audio, I've had Kindle. You know, I just can't do it on the phone or like listening. If I listen, I've listened to some audiobooks, but it's like I really have to be there, closing my eyes, trying to focus on what they're saying. Because if I just leave it in the background, I start hearing my own thoughts louder than what whoever's the narrator is. But if I have a book and I'm reading, it's like I'm dedicated to it.
It's so weird that you say that, because like I can relate to that exactly in the opposite sense. So like if I'm listening to someone, and it's almost like puts me in a zone, because what I like about the audio is that I will multitask.
Yeah.
So like I'll do something.
I'm not great at multitasking.
Yeah, so I'll do something, whatever it is. And it's not like, you know, like none of us are really good multitaskers in a sense. It's just that if you can separate your informational consumption from like something busy, some type of busy work that you're doing, it's like I can put those two together really easily. In fact, they help me concentrate on what I'm listening to. But exactly what you said about like audio or video is exactly where I am with books, where if I try to read a book, my mind will go away, wander, and it'll be like onto something else, or listening to something else, or what's going on around me.
No.
Where
With
I
me,
can't
the book
focus.
will anchor me.
Yeah, it'll actually pull you in.
Pull me in, and then if I read something and I'm past the page and I happen to wander a little bit, then I ask myself, wait, what did I just read? It's just so easy to just slightly move my eyes up and go back and read it, versus pausing the audio, rewinding it, and then I'll go way too back, or, you know.
Right.
Video, it's okay. I like video. Obviously, video format for me is...
But do you have to focus on it? Like I'll watch a lot of video format stuff, and I'll just listen to it.
No, if the video's on, I have to watch it.
Yeah, you have to focus. You have to focus on it.
And sometimes I catch myself saying, I don't really need to visually see what...
And I almost feel like guilty admitting this, because, you know, my job and my life is reading. Like I'm reading emails all the time, or I'm composing emails. So like I wouldn't even know how to estimate how much of my life is in front of reading words. Like a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know how you can be illiterate in this world anymore. But when it comes to a book, like I really have a mental block. And it's kind of crazy. Like the last times that I remember reading books, like my mind, as I'm going from page to page, is like I'm looking at it like, oh, I only got 2 pages. I only went 3 pages. And it's like you're looking at the whole book. It's like it's gonna take me forever.
But if
to
you
get
hear
through
it,
this
you're like,
book.
oh, I can knock this out.
And it's insane because like there are books that if I read them on paper, and I'll give you one. There's a business book I really like. It's called, and I've read it so many times now that I can almost like rehearse it. It's called The Goal. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's a really it's a book by Ellie Goldratt, and it was published in like 1983 or 84. So I mean, at this point, it's 40 years old, and he's a business guy, but he focused on manufacturing. So his whole focus was, at the time, trying to convince companies in the U.S. that some of the things that companies were doing to achieve like efficiency or less expensive products was what everyone thought they needed to do, and they did. He brought forward some counterintuitive concepts that showed that some of the things that people thought they were doing to save money in their production was actually costing them money. It was actually making them less efficient. And I mean, now his ideas aren't revolutionary anymore. Most businesses actually accept it as like common knowledge. But at the time, it was revolutionary because it was still in its infancy. But the book he wrote was a novel. So it's like a novel about manufacturing. And it's a pretty decent sized book. And I've actually gotten through the entire book in a day, an audio. I've gotten through the entire book in a day. And I forget what it was. It was like, I'd almost want to look it up, but it's got to be at least like 11 or 12 hours of audio.
Wow.
And I would just start it in the morning, and like on a road trip I've done this, and I just listen to it the whole way through.
Well, yeah, driving and probably on a road trip. It's like, well, what else is going to distract you?
Right. But if I was trying to read the paper version of it,
I hope you're not trying to read the paper version while you're driving.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, but like if I even today, I think if I picked up the paper version, and I could go into the middle of that book and just start anywhere, and I would know the context of what was going on at that point in the novel.
You know the book so well
because I've listened to it so many times.
Yeah.
But if I just said, all right, I'm going to commit to reading this book, which I'm familiar with, which I really enjoy, and I'm just going to read it on paper, it would take me forever. I think it would take me forever to get through it. I'd get bored with it. I could be wrong.
And I think it's all how people learn, right?
Right.
Because if something is given to me in a quick amount of time, I might not remember it as well. Versus if I'm picking up a book, reading 5 to 10 pages one day, then I go and live my life, experience something that reminds me of those first 5-10 pages.
Right.
I bring it up in a conversation, and then someone shares their experience with me, and I make the connection with the book. Then I come back a week later, read pages 11 through 25. It's like, okay, I'm absorbing the information slowly and gradually.
Right.
So it's easier for me to remember, and then when I go back to the middle of the book, like the example you gave of putting my finger somewhere, I understand the context because it took me a while to kind of soak this in. Versus if it's just like a quick thing, my attention span adapts and says, okay, this is I need to give this a short attention span because this is a short media or short piece of information.
Right.
And then I might be like, oh yeah, I forgot I saw that, or it won't register as for the long run.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of cool. I mean, we I think we definitely have two very different perspectives on that, which is cool.
We're both nerds. That's
for sure, which is good. I wear that badge proudly. But yeah, so I had a thought and I lost it there, but I mean that's kind of good. So this is kind of like giving us an idea of like what kind of stuff, how we consume information, And I mean, ultimately, this is kind of what I'm seeing us doing is maybe this is like a good segue is when we think about the kind of things that impact us and the kind of um, like I'm always curious when I talk to people how cognizant we are of what kinds of things in our lives are actually influencing our perspective. So like we're in this culture, like we're both in Florida. We came from up north, and we had upbringings out in the country versus in the city, and like there's certain things that we just can't undo, and the best we can do is become aware that there have been people that have influenced our lives, right or wrong, and it shaped us for who we are. But so what I always wonder when I talk to people is like, well, first off, can you identify the thought leaders in your life? Like, I don't think anybody can say that they learned everything on their own. I mean, they wouldn't be telling the truth
Yeah,
if they said that.
Yeah.
There's actually a word. Do you ever hear the word autodidact?
No.
So an autodidact is just the fancy way of saying someone who's self-taught. So like there are people like probably like Leonardo da Vinci would be a case for an autodidact, or Isaac Newton would be a good case for an autodidact. Like they were in such a cutting edge mode of their thought that they were the ones that were blazing the trail. So, but even they, like if you think of someone like Isaac Newton, he would tell you that that like the lore is that someone asked him like, well, how did you like get to be so smart? I'm paraphrasing this, but how did you get to be so smart? How did you learn all this stuff? And he said, standing on the shoulders of giants. So even he said like there were people that even paved the road for him to come up with what quite frankly were very revolutionary ideas in science at his time. But he would be the first one to say, well, I didn't get here on my own. And I sometimes think too, and this is something I think would be good food for a conversation, is like, well, how much does pop culture indirectly or directly impact us, even as especially even as Christians? I think Christians from 100 years ago, like good solid Christians from 100 years ago, would probably look at our lives and our lifestyles and like look at us weird, like yeah, it's like I relate with you, like I recognize you as my brother or sister in the Lord, but like you're much more absorbed into the world. Like if we're just being honest, you're much more absorbed into the world than anything that we would conceive of as Christians that are separated and set apart in our time. And I mean, God's grace is, God's good. So,
but that would be from their perspective,
right?
That would be their judgment on us. But let's say historical Christians, right, from like a previous era, they struggled and battled with like these internal things that now our world extracts it out of us, makes it, projects and makes it louder, makes it more obvious.
And they're probably like a product of their time.
Yeah, exactly, a product of their time, because what they would judge us and say, hey, that's
we'd probably be able to turn it around.
Yeah, it's like, well, you're really stuck to the world more than we were. It's like, well, what about you?
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like you find out like some great, like if we were able to time travel, like had like this really irrational short temper or something. It's like yeah, they're really thoughtful and they're really smart, but it's like, man, they're a jerk.
And think about it, they're in the Bible for a reason as examples too, like the saints and those kind of Christians. And I'm going way back. I know you weren't referring to that far back, but you would think the farther back, the more in tune with Christianity they would be, right?
Yeah.
Or with the Lord, or with, because he probably wasn't named Christ before, Christians before Christ. But, but I can, let's say we're time travelers, right? George and Adam time travel back to Mount Sinai while Moses is coming down, and he's upset at that. We're right there with him, like, yeah, look at these people, man. Like, how are they gonna build this calf? like they don't get it.
It's like, are these people even worth saving?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're, might as well just start over again.
All I did was watch on TV. Yeah,
but like, Yeah, that's a good point though. If you like time travel one of them further and just show them like one of what we at this point would think is like the most benign MTV music video, they'd
Yeah.
probably be like appalled
Yeah, yeah.
that this even exists.
Yeah. You know what was the first MTV video that came out?
Was it Thriller?
No, it was um, video kill the radio star.
Oh, really? That
Uh,
was the first
I
one?
think that was. Let's see.
Yeah, look it up. And what I wonder is your mic still? Yeah, my mic's still working.
I think it
Still,
is.
the light's still flashing, and we're still recording, so I must have plenty of memory. I don't know if I'm gonna run out of memory. Does it?
Video kill the radio
That was the first one.
star.
What year was that?
Let's see.
Hold on, let me guess.
1981.
You beat me to it. All right. So I was actually gonna guess a little bit later than that, because I actually have an impact memory the first time I saw MTV.
Oh.
Because can you look it up?
Yeah.
When did Michael Jackson's Thriller first come out on MTV? The video.
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, tell me.
December 2nd, 1983.
1983. Okay, so I was I was like seven years old. What month?
December 2nd.
Yeah. So I would have been 7 years old. So I remember. So I lived in this little town north of Pittsburgh, and just to give you like the demographics. So I lived on a fairly nice neighborhood. It was a rural road, but it was a fairly nice neighborhood. But we had like the least expensive house in an up and coming neighborhood. So my neighbor across the street, from my perspective, they had money. We did not have money. Like, I grew up in a basement that was an unfinished, like the top was still under construction. I have memories of it being under construction. I'm the youngest out of 10 kids. So it's like my life was hand-me-downs and eclectic things because I was raised by Hungarian peasants. So while everybody else had color TVs and cable TV, like I was 30 years behind watching a little 13-inch color TV playing with the little like antennas, aluminum
You had that
foil.
little toy where you try to get the ball in the peg.
Yeah, I had that. Yeah.
Rolling a wheel with a stick.
Yeah. So I mean, I hope that like paints a picture. Like, we weren't. Put it this way: we weren't poor. We were broke.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever heard that from Dave Chappelle. Like,
Yeah.
we weren't poor. We were broke. Like, it was just a condition of our lives. But it was a good family. We never went hungry or anything. So like, I'm eternally grateful. But
Is it because you're from Hungary?
yeah, we're always hungry. We're never hungry because we're from Hungary. It was just the other way. So my neighbor right across the street, and he was my age, so he was a couple months older than me. I'm not even gonna name him, but he picked on me relentlessly. Like I was his whipping boy when it came right down to it. But sometimes he was nice to me, and like he was my only similarly aged person in the neighborhood because it was a rural area. So I can remember 1983. It was probably at the end of the year near Christmas, and I'm in the basement, and he's like showing off the fact that they have MTV.
Wait, how old are you?
I was 7 at the time.
7.
So he's like showing it off to me, and I remember watching Thriller. Like I was amazed first off, but it was scary.
Yeah.
Because the video is scary for a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And I just remember like being kind of envious because here my neighbor across the street has this nice house, and we were in the basement, nice finished basement, that nice big color TV, which was probably like this big, and watching MTV, and I just remember like that really like stuck with me that here I was watching this on my neighbor's TV. So now it's like, all right, now I have a touch point as MTV unfolded. And
It's the thing, when that came out, videos were already coming out on MTV for 2 years.
Yeah, yep. And that was the first time I saw MTV.
I was born into MTV, so.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have known any different. Like it was already around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember music videos as a kid. My dad liked the Thriller a lot. My dad enjoyed that.
I mean,
He
that
showed me
was.
that music video a lot as a kid.
Hmm.
Kind of like a movie, like a kids entertainment thing.
Yeah.
You know.
And the other, there was a. I'm almost embarrassed to admit this. So there are two music videos that really stuck with me. Um, was that one, Thriller, and the other one was Will Smith's.
Uh, na 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 na.
No.
Nah,
It was way back. No, way before then.
Oh, summertime. Summertime.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Oh, parents don't understand.
Yeah, parents don't understand.
Okay.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I remember like anytime I got to see that, I was like, oh, I want to see this.
Yeah.
I was like, that was like one of my favorite videos.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I can watch that now, but
When I saw that video, that was already an old school video for me.
yeah,
You know.
you're right. So I was watching it when it was brand new on MTV, and it wasn't at my house because we didn't have MTV. Like we never, in fact, as far as I know, my house never had cable in it. I don't think. No. I mean, just to give you a little more perspective, we had an oil stove for heat, but we never used it. So like we had oil, like it was almost like a backup emergency stove.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew it. It was like in this one room. I'd never seen it run because we heated our house with wood. So we had a wood stove, and my dad he went out of his way to build this really nice enclosure, like a brick. It was almost like a little brick house in the middle of the basement that housed this
He gave you
this
porridge.
little stove.
And you're like, Papa, may I have some more?
Well, at Christmas time we would actually roast chestnuts on top of
Oh, nice.
on top of this wood stove, and we had to cut firewood. That was my Saturday mornings dread. I'd get up earlier than everybody else because that was my way of watching cartoons. That was like my alone time. Watch Bugs Bunny and
It's pretty cool though.
Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
And I would always dread when my dad would wake up because as soon as he woke up and got moving, it meant I had to get up and go cut firewood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, oh no, here he comes. He's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go out in the woods. And honestly, now looking back, like those were some of the most valuable times in my childhood was just being out in the woods with my dad, cutting firewood and getting ready for the winter.
Your father's still alive?
No, he passed away.
Oh, he passed away?
Almost 25 years ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And that's kind of weird. Like, last night we were talking about my life being vanilla.
Yeah.
Like, it's like been pretty even keel. And, I sometimes have to think about it a little bit because while that's my perception, like there are things about my childhood and even my early adulthood that are unusual. Like, I think they're relatable, but they're just like, oh, like, okay, so my childhood wasn't as drama free as I've like convinced myself that it is, and then I have to look back and be like, oh, okay, yeah, so there was some turbulence and some turmoil that I went through. That even my older brothers and sisters, a couple of the ones that are closer to my age can relate to, but like the oldest ones, I have to explain it to them because they know it from a distance. But it's like I grew up in a different house because my mom passed away when.
Your mom passed away?
Yeah. Whenever I was really young.
Oh, so you grew up with your father?
Yeah.
You remember your mom?
And my stepmom. Yeah, I do. I have some vague memories, but yeah, like I do second guess myself. Like there are a couple memories that I have that are fairly vivid, but then I'm almost willing to convince myself that some of my memories are now like almost like constructed memories. So I don't put a ton of weight into them, but they're like just a couple little things, and they're not really. I mean, I don't know. Like this is the kind of stuff that I don't know how much I'd want to get into here, but like there are some things that were just kind of tough because she was sick. So, I didn't know any different. So like the only person living your life is you. So like your life is as normal as it's going to get for you because that's your life.
Yeah.
So, as I just processed the events of my life and I went through it, you know, it was almost like in hindsight, I had to look back to try to understand what my frame of mind was back when, you know, like my first 6 years of my life and my memory up to that point, which was almost nothing, was, you know, living in an unfinished house in a basement with a mom that was just, she was there all the time, but she was sick. And, you know, like one of my highlights of my day was I can remember my dad coming home from work at like 5:30, between 5 and 5:30 at night. And he'd always like, it was like a routine with him and the kids. Like he'd get out of the car, we'd run and greet him. He'd get out, give us all a kiss and greet us. And then he would just go and do his thing. And my dad was like, I don't know, like the best way to describe it, like he wasn't like a really loving guy per se, but he was still a compassionate person in some ways. But he, you know, like he was just doing his own thing. So, you know, like he wanted us to succeed. So he put an investment into us in a way that he made sure that we had what we needed, but he also wasn't going to hand you stuff. And he wasn't going to like dole out affection in a way that he was like trying to promote that. And maybe that was my perspective. Like I'm almost curious, like if my older brothers and sisters would be like, no, Adam, like that's not how he was with us. But now that I'm looking back on it, like maybe that was also a function of his own worries and concerns. Like he was more just thinking about how to make ends meet and how to like just get through day by day, how to get, you know, just make sure we have a meal on the table. How are we misspending the non-existent money that we have?
Yeah. Like, let's not work out of a deficit. You know?
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you already answered this or mentioned this earlier, but you're the youngest?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, youngest out of 10.
Out of 10?
Yeah, and I have 5 stepbrothers and sisters too.
Oh, wow, it's a big one.
Yeah.
We have
my stepmom's still alive too. She's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't
You're cool
really.
with her?
Yeah, I'm cool with her. I mean, we had our times, but I mean, I'm cool with her. Like if like, I don't know, it's been a while. It's probably been a couple years, and my last several communications with her have been on Facebook Messenger. You know, I'll have a question for her, ask her how things are going, and I mean.
Did she have a part in your upbringing? Like,
oh yeah,
a motherly part?
Well, yeah. Probably something I'd want to cautiously dig into, but yeah, that was an unusual time in my life for sure.
Yeah.
Like it was a put it this way, like my mom dying at a young age was
traumatic enough.
I guess. I mean, in hindsight,
brain,
right?
You know?
I mean, that was like threw a big enough wrench into it, but you know, when like stereotypically nobody likes their step parent, right? So like everybody, like you're going to be able to sense the stereotype coming off of it, where it's like everybody who gets a step parent when they're young, that step parent is trying to install themselves as the parent, and the kid wants to just completely reject them, like it's almost like an antivirus, right? Like you're not my mom. So I'm sure there was that facet of it, but you know, there was just more to it. Like it was there was, you know, it wasn't all bad. Like she wasn't an awful.
She didn't have you scrubbing the.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, like you know, it's kind of funny. Like you almost feel like, you know, like how the Cinderella story unfolds. Like yeah, that kind of stuff is stuck in your head, right? So it's like, I mean, there was more to it. Like I almost don't want to sugarcoat it too much, but I also don't want to be uncharitable. But like, yeah, there was like a Cinderella effect. Like you had the actual siblings, and then you had the step siblings.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And you know, like we were the step kids. And you know, my dad was working all the time, and so we had to figure out how to live with this new person. And you know, I mean, just to kind of add to it, we were raised in a home speaking Hungarian by 2 parents that were immigrants that like they had no option but to band together because it was like them against the world. Like they were, they spoke very broken English. I mean, even up to the day my dad died, as much as his English had improved, like he plateaued, and like it was hard sometimes to even have a conversation with my own father because
But you speak Hungarian though.
I don't.
you
I have
don't?
I have older siblings that do.
Oh, so how did you communicate with your dad then? In English?
So, ask the question again.
How did you communicate with your dad?
Well, in English,
Okay.
but so like I did learn Hungarian. So like I I I don't know if I'm right on this. I think it's partially right, or at least it's salient to why I was held back. So I was held back in first grade. So I went to kindergarten. I went early because I'm a September baby. So I was able to go when I was 4 years old. Bless you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I think that was a mistake. Because A, I was only 4. B, I didn't speak English. I only spoke Hungarian, and I don't have a C. But but regardless,
That's why you got left
yeah,
back.
that's
You
right,
didn't
that's
get class
exactly-
B.
Well, yeah, I have I have
You're
memories.
like A, B.
I don't know what's after B. I have memories of being confused in kindergarten. So I guess I was like that. That's a pretty old memory, right? When you're 4 years old. I remember sitting in the basement of this elementary school where the kindergarten was conducted, and like looking around at these other kids that were with me, feeling like I was left out. Like I didn't know why I was left out, and I could perceive that the other kids were like following along with what the teacher was saying and what they were talking about. And I remember like sitting there going like, I don't know, like what's happening. I don't know what's going on,
Yeah.
and just feeling like detached. And so like I made it through like who fails kindergarten? Like I could have been eating glue every day and they still would have passed me on kindergarten. But then I think it really revealed itself when I went to first grade that I just wasn't ready. Like, I was still.
You got held
way
back
behind.
in first grade.
Yeah, I got held back in first grade.
Okay.
And that was probably like one of the best things that happened to me, because I think by the time I got to my second spin of first grade and the second grade, I think I started getting my feet under me. And like looking back too, it's to connect the dots. It's weird, like the experience my older siblings had. They had a much more attentive set of family. So like they had mom and dad teaching them Hungarian. Because there was a bunch of them, like they could teach each other English, and like they were figuring out the American ways with their school, with their friends, but also maintaining that relationship with our parents. And then so by the time it gets to even my next older brother and me, it starts to like there's like a shift in the atmosphere of the home, and that's kind of what we grew up in. And I mean, it's my life. I can't change it. So like, I look at it positively now.
Yeah.
Like it all worked out.
And you say these things because of how you started off when you said your life actually isn't as vanilla way from
Right.
as we were
Right.
we were saying yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not as vanilla for sure.
We have some things in common. I lost my father also.
Right.
Thank God my mom is still alive. My father, technically, I had like 3 or 4 stepmoms. But it wasn't that kind of experience. Never lived with them. I was always with my mom.
Okay.
My parents also didn't speak English, but I
Right.
spoke Spanish.
Right. And you still do.
I still do. What else? What's another thing we have in common? You were saying a couple of
I
things.
speak
here.
Spanish better than I speak Hungarian.
Yeah?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you want to call what I do
Yeah.
speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
But
But it's completely different. I grew up in New York City,
yeah.
street, urban.
Yeah.
Taking the subway, people living on top of each other, apartment buildings.
Yeah. And you're in Manhattan, right?
Manhattan, uptown Manhattan.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people that live in Manhattan, so there's a lot of population there. But
Yeah, no,
overall,
all kinds of people.
not a lot of people worldwide
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's
Actually,
a
the
false
neighborhood
statement.
I'm from, Washington Heights. I mean, growing up, it was it still is a predominantly Dominican neighborhood, but it had its Hungarian, Jew, and
Yeah.
um, what's
It was
like
predominantly what though? Like what kind?
Dominican
Okay,
Republic,
so a lot of Spanish speakers.
Spanish speakers when I
Yeah.
grew up. But probably like 50 years before I was born, 40 years before I was born, it was Hungarian, Jew,
So
and Greek.
so you distinctly remember Hungarians, like the Hungarian neighborhood
No,
in
because
New
no,
York.
me growing up, I didn't. So I know a little bit of the history of the neighborhood, Washington
Okay.
Heights, but I never grew up. And there were still some like in certain streets, some like people who were already like in their 60s, 70s to 80s that were Hungarian, and some of those bars were still open, and and you can see, okay, these people never left. These people are here from when that group of people were the predominant group.
Right.
Uh, but no, I mean everyone I know was pretty much Dominican.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like you can lean on each other while you're learning English, where you have enough people around you that if you want to speak Spanish or English, it's kind of like dealer's choice. Like
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I can switch between the two.
Yeah.
And I'm also the youngest. That's another thing we have in
Okay.
common.
And how many siblings do you have?
I'm the youngest of 6.
Okay, so that's a big family. Yeah.
I don't have step brothers or sisters. I do have half siblings, but I mean, I just call them
But that's of the 6.
of the 6. Yeah,
Okay,
I just
some-
call them my
some of them
brother
are
and my
half.
sisters.
Yeah.
You know, but they have different moms. And then my two sisters that are from my same mom, they were teenagers when I was born. They were like 14, 15. So they already spoke English, and my parents didn't speak English. So in the house, I grew up speaking Spanish, and my sisters, excuse me, taught me English before I started kindergarten.
Okay.
So I went into kindergarten already speaking English and Spanish and knowing how to read and knowing the difference between how to pronounce A in Spanish and A in English. But it wasn't really a big issue because a lot of the kids I went to school with
They were in the same boat.
on the same boat,
Yeah.
you know? And and you said something about how when you started growing up, the climate kind of changed in your home, you know, it shifted. For me, it was the same thing, but the opposite way.
So I went from dysfunction to function.
Yeah, according to my older sisters,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
According to my older sisters, I've had it the best. You know, my father and
Okay.
mom were together. You know,
Yeah.
I was the golden child. You know, my father cleaned up his act. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
compared
good.
to what they experienced. Still a great dad to them. They're still thankful, but they said, "Oh, you don't know the dad that we had." You know,
Yeah, yeah. So he matured basically. And
he was 44 when I was born. So
yeah. So he
yeah.
And I mean, I wonder, like there's probably a lot of people that can relate to that, and it is weird. I bet you that's more common than not. And you know, I don't want to paint too bad of a picture because you know there were good times and you know in a lot of ways too because I know people that have went through some really bad things in their childhood and you know I thank God that there's a lot of things that I was spared from that other kids had to go through, like you know someone like and maybe you've dealt with this, just having someone like who's always drunk in the house or has really bad temper. Like my dad, he had a temper, but his temper was with purpose. Like if he was mad at you, it was to get your attention and make you very well aware that whatever you did, don't ever do it again.
Yeah, it wasn't abusive.
It wasn't abusive.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I got smacked around a couple times, but it wasn't like, hey, I'm holding a grudge and I'm just going to beat on you. It's more like, I'm getting your attention. Don't do this again.
My father kind of coddled me. You know, my
Yeah.
father was different. My father was very affectionate, very
Yeah. So he took care of you.
playful, very kind. I think he hit me probably like once or twice.
Yeah.
And I think he was drunk that day, and it also wasn't abusive, but I think
Yeah.
it was like him like saying, "Okay, I'm not as tough as I should be with him.
Yeah. And then
Let me make today."
and the alcohol is giving him a bad perception of what that adjustment should actually look like.
Yeah, and it was very like I remember he I don't know, I think I spoke back to him or something, and then he's like, "What did you say?" And I go, what? I didn't say anything. And he was kind of like, and then he like kind of was like,
Well, that's funny. It sounds like he was actually a really kindly, like a really kindly person
Yeah.
in general. So where are your parents originally
Colombian.
from? They're Colombian. Okay. So your parents were Colombians immigrating to New York.
Well, my father went to live in London first.
Oh wow. Okay.
London, yeah.
Okay. So he went to London,
Yeah.
but that was before any of your brothers and sisters were born? Or were you guys all...
My sister was born in London. One
Okay.
of my sisters, the one that's right before
But then the rest of you were born in New York.
The rest of them were born in Colombia.
Oh, but you were born in...
I was born in New York.
So you're the only one born in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm the only
okay.
one born in the U.S. And my other sister was born in London.
And your parents both came from Colombia, your mom and your
Both,
dad.
yeah.
So, but your dad spent time without your mom in London?
Yeah, with my sister's mom.
Okay.
My sister and my brother's mom.
Got you.
Yeah. That's
And
why my sister was born in London.
so then ultimately your parents converged in New York, both Colombians, and in a Dominican neighborhood.
They lived together in Colombia. I'm not I don't know if they were together when he chose to. I think they were still together when he chose to go work in London, right?
Okay.
And he was sending back money. You know, he was working, taking care of my older sisters, the ones that are from my mom's side, right? And my brother had already been born. I don't remember if my mom knew that my brother was born or not. What I know was a surprise to her was that he took my brother's and sister's mom to London to live with him.
Okay.
So when she found out that my dad was cheating, well, I don't know if that's the moment she found out. I don't really know that detail. Like if she already found out, forgave him, and thought he cleaned up, or it was all brand new to her. The point is that when my mom found out that their mom was living with my dad in London, she got upset. She sold the house and she moved to New York with my father's family. Some of my father's family had already immigrated to New York.
Okay.
And they were kind of always on my mom's side
Yeah.
when it came to that kind of stuff. So they supported. They said, yeah, come with the girls, bring the girls to New York. My mom went to New York with my older sisters. I wasn't born. My sister was born in London.
Wow.
My father found out that my mom had left Colombia. He got, well, this is what his perspective of what he shared with me was that he started getting worried and nervous about not seeing my sisters, right? Or disappearing in New York. So he went and moved to New York
Okay.
to find my sisters, find my mom. I don't really know if they got back together right away or how that worked, but they eventually got back together, and then I was born.
Okay.
And my sisters were teenagers at that time, so they lived in. He brought my brother and my sister over to New York.
So if I'm hearing this right, basically, like your older siblings, they have this kind of tumultuous moving around, not sure where my life is. Is it in London? Is it in New York? Was that kind of what was going on, or were they always in New York, but they're always just wondering like, hey, when's Dad coming home, or what's going on with Dad?
I don't know about my brother. I would have to ask him, but I don't know if my brother ever lived in London. He may have. He may have just stayed in Colombia. I know my sister, his younger sister, because she's my sister, but they have the same mom. She was born in London, but I think she left London very young. I don't think she remembers ever living in London.
Okay.
She was a baby. And my two older sisters that left with my mom, they only knew Colombia and the U.S.
Okay.
They never went to London.
But they knew Colombia and the U.S., which was like you're up and you're moving, you're trying to reorient your life. And I guess my point is like, out of everybody, the reason they're probably envious of you is like, hey, I just grew up, made friends in New York, and I live my life. Like, well, I don't understand what the problem is.
If you're listening, I know you're not envious. But my sisters were like 6 or 7 when they left Colombia.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, compared to me,
Yeah,
obviously
you had like
they're
a stable, you had like a stable environment.
stable. I was born and raised in New York. Didn't leave New York till 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, and that's like that's another thing we share in common. Like our biggest immigration story is moving from the north to Florida,
Yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, and that's definitely like I don't know, and I'm sure you do process the idea of what your parents went through when they immigrated, and I think about that from my own parents' perspective. Like my dad, my mom, the girlfriend at the time, like they were literally married on the run from Hungary,
Mm,
and three of my uncles, they all just agreed that they were going to get out of Hungary.
mm,
I mean, a lot of people did the same time they did, so they all escaped in 1956 during the revolution,
mm,
and so it was almost like your classic the clothes on your back,
mm-hmm,
whatever probably you could pack into a couple small
mm-hmm.
bags, and like
Came in through Ellis Island.
no, I think they flew in. That's a good question. I think they flew here, so yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'd have to look into where they actually landed. Like something tells me that they either landed in Pittsburgh or Buffalo, New York.
Oh,
I don't think they. I think I'm confident. I'm pretty confident. That's honestly like, and I've had that question in my head. I never asked the right people. I'm sure some of my older brothers and sisters could confirm it.
mm-hmm,
But the part of the story that I know is that um, two of my uncles were set on living in Buffalo, and they did. Their whole entire U.S. existence remained in Buffalo, New York. And then my one uncle was hard set on going to Pittsburgh because that's where the steel industry was, and he was an engineer,
mm-hmm,
so his intent was to get involved anywhere the steel industry is going on, assuming that he could find somewhere to work that was engineering.
mm-hmm,
And I think my dad told me this, so this isn't something I'm guessing on, but my dad basically said that since two went to Buffalo and the one had his heart set on going to Pittsburgh, that it was like, well, I'll just go with the one going to Pittsburgh. Like he wasn't really like had his heart set on
yeah.
anything.
He just accompanied him.
Yeah, so and that's kind of interesting too because like I tell you all about my rural upbringing in the small town north of Pittsburgh, which is all I knew. But like my oldest brothers and sisters, their life started out in Homestead in Pittsburgh, which was kind of I don't know at the time I think it was an okay neighborhood, but it was like very densely populated suburb of Pittsburgh.
Mm,
And I mean now if you know anything about Homestead, like Homestead's a pretty rough, pretty rough. At least it was. I mean I don't know what it's like now. I think it still is. Kind of a depressed area that's kind of densely populated. And Pittsburgh has a few of those because I don't know how much you know about Pittsburgh, but like it's steel country, right? The Steeler. We have the
mm-hmm,
Steelers, and
mm-hmm,
we get that name honestly because that's where uh, Carnegie Mellon started the steel industry. So like Pittsburgh is known as the heart of where the steel industry started, and in addition to that, north of where I grew up, I don't know, like maybe not even an hour, like 45 minutes north of where I grew up was where the first commercial oil well was done. So Drake's Well, which is considered the first commercially viable oil well, was drilled not far from me. So where I grew up, north of Pittsburgh, was a oil boom, like an oil boom town.
mm,
So like if you look at old Pittsburgh, like you see a bunch of oil derricks that are hanging out in the picture, like wooden derricks. Even to this day, if it's still running, I think it is. They like literally walking distance from the house I grew up in is the oldest functioning oil well that's still producing.
wow.
And now it's like a historical thing, so they keep
Mm-hmm,
it running. I think it like barely produces oil,
mm-hmm,
but they keep it running and they
mm-hmm,
keep pulling oil out of it. And it's like back in the woods, like nobody can even get to it, but it's still, at least it was a couple years ago, but I think it's still chugging away,
mm-hmm,
making a little bit of oil. So between the oil and the steel, that area was like it was boom country. Like there was like a lot going on, especially around the turn of the century, like early 1900s.
Mhm.
There was just a ton of activity. But fast forward to when I'm growing up, that stuff was like largely going away. So like that was like the big fear when I was a child was like, hey, all our jobs are going overseas. Like these factories are shutting down, and like Pennsylvania's losing its dominance in steel. People blame the unions. People blame the government, and it's like China was taking it all over, and that had a big impact. And if you look at it today, like there's scars culturally. There's scars associated with it. So like you know, I'll go back to the vanilla term. Like don't lose sight of the fact that what I'm talking about, like it's still a pretty vanilla area. Like like we don't have gang violence or anything. Like it's not like there's nothing crazy. In fact, one of the reasons a lot of people like living where I grew up is that well nothing happens. So like the economy goes crazy and like the property values go way up in this city or they drop out or some
You
kind
guys are
of
still just,
yeah some kind of looting is happening in this city.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're just like steady Eddie. Like
Yeah.
nothing changes. And when we want things to change, it's annoying because nothing changes. But when like the whole world's on fire, we're thankful because nothing changes. Everybody's living in the same old houses that were constructed 100 years ago, and some new stuff's going up, but it's all real slow.
How come all that boredom didn't start any troublemaking?
Like, what do you mean?
Well, if nothing changes, it's all the same. I'm pretty sure people got bored.
Well, so I mean, I would argue that the kind of things that resulted from it, and I don't know, are you familiar with the movie Hillbilly Elegy?
Oh no, it's on Netflix, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't seen it.
But do you know what it's about?
So
you know-
I saw like the preview.
So
I don't remember.
JD Vance, Trump's running mate, who's running for VP right now.
Oh, no.
No.
Well,
You,
I know
you
the
know
name.
who who he is, but you don't know him.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know much about him.
So this is a good touch point if you're interested in understanding like the background. JD Vance wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy, and the whole book it's his autobiography. Like it was his upbringing, and he grew up in Appalachia. And if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, but I believe like his upbringing is like in the Kentucky kind of like Kentucky, West Virginia type area in the Appalachian Mountains. And basically it was like these small depressed towns that were like people were just poor, like people didn't have money. And the whole premise of the book is his upbringing was at the hands of a drug addicted mom who couldn't take care of him and a grandma that was rough, but she's credited by JD Vance himself as being the one that really pushed him to not just be mediocre. Like she pushed him to get his education and make sure he pushed himself to be successful and not get in with the wrong people doing the wrong things.
His thought leader.
Yeah, then you're right. So like, yeah, I mean, even if she wasn't a thought leader, she was a disciplinarian in his life to say that it was important for him to pursue the right things. Because I mean, I would almost say she wasn't a thought leader because she was. I mean, from his own perspective, she was kind of simple. Like she was shrewd in her own way, but it wasn't like she was pouring information into him. She was just being a disciplinarian, saying like, you are not going to get out of line. Like you're going to take care of your things. You're going to go to school on time. You're going to get good grades. And, she helped ignite him. So I bring that up for the fact that like the area that I came from wasn't as, like at least the way it's depicted in Hillbilly Elegy, it's not the same. Like you have a mix of people just want to live in a small town and like a good example, like the town I grew up in, anybody who lived in that town, not everybody, but the vast majority of people that lived in the town, they would have to drive like 10 or 15 miles to go to work. So they'd have to go from our small town to the nearest like decent sized city to do work because there wasn't like industry where we were. Like there was like a couple oil refineries in a neighboring town, and You know, like small things. You know, Dollar General was in town. Very stereotypical. Like, you know, you have like the small town feel. Local fire department, volunteer fire department, little grocery store, and little bank. You know, a couple banks, and bars. So now, do people get themselves in trouble in that area? It's like, well, like if you want to get out and have entertainment in your life where you're interacting with the people in the town, the easy button is the bars. So like people that are hankering on a Friday night to go do something, it's like, okay, yeah, you can go into the city, into the main city that's like 10 miles from us and go out to eat, go to a movie. Like it's all, you know, you get everything you want. But if you're in town, you just want to hang out, you go to a bar. Well, and there are people that go to church. But even in the time that I grew up, there was and I don't know how many bars there are in that town now. There's 1,000 people in the town, and I think there's two bars left in the town. Like there's a club, and then there's one bar that's active, and I think that's it. But when I was growing up, there was like 7 bars. So like, in some ways, that was probably the highest point of people just kind of like not knowing what to do other than just get through the grind of their workday, raise their families the best they can, and go out to the bar. And like, so alcoholism is a big issue for sure.
So there was some trouble being made in town, right?
Oh yeah, and I mean there was always like varying degrees of it, and like people would take their trucks out into the woods and get stuck, and you know, there's always like petty things would happen, but like I don't know, I honestly don't even remember it, but I remember like there was one point in time, it wasn't even right in town for us, it was like in some neighboring town somebody was murdered, and like we talked about it for years because it was like the only time we'd ever heard of a murderer in the area. Yeah. But people would die, and I mean it's unfortunate. Like I have close friends who have dealt with death in their lives because of drug addictions, and so like it wasn't like we were guarded from everything. Like, you know, things like heroin took off there. Like people went to the neighboring town that everybody went to, and it turned into like a hotbed of heroin use. So like here we are in these 2 relatively small towns, and it's like, you serious? Like we have this huge heroin issue? It was like, how does this happen? So there was like there's probably a different side of the world. And I would kind of go back to, and I know I haven't brought this up, but you know, I lived in California for part of my teenage years, like a couple years. And, you know, my perception of California is probably a little bit skewed because that's whenever I started getting into drugs and getting into a bad lifestyle. And so I think most ordinary people think California is a little strange. Like if you get in around San Diego and LA, like there's a culture there in California.
For sure.
But you know, like I was in like the worst subset of that culture because of my addictions. Like I was finding myself running around with a subset of the weirdness that was also drug addicts, and you know, like just people that were not giving you good advice.
Yeah.
So like that's my skewed perspective of California. So like I'll tell anybody, like it was beautiful out there. Like I love visiting there. I've been there a couple times since I was a teenager.
When was this? The 90s or early 2000s?
Yeah, I mean that was like when I moved out there, that would have been like 1991. So I moved back.
The microphone's still working?
Yeah, I think so. Is the light still flashing? Yeah, the light's still
flashing.
flashing.
Flashing? Okay.
Yeah, I think you're good. So I went out there this gets a little weird. So I went out there for a summer, I went out there between my 9th and my 10th grade. And it was almost like a trial. Like my sister was like my home life was weird, and you know, they were some of my older siblings were just concerned, like they weren't sure what it was doing to me,
Uh-huh.
and so like my sister was basically interested in letting me experience life outside of like the dysfunction.
Uh-huh.
So she convinced my dad that it would be a good idea for me to go out there and spend the summer. So I went out there between ninth and 10th grade, spent the summer there. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Like it was like,
Are all your siblings still alive?
yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah. Um, so, and this is one of my older siblings. So this is the second oldest in the family, and so she got me out there, and it was like it was a good experiment. And I went out there and I made friends, and you know I just kind of hung out, and you know my sister was divorced, so like it was nice. She like, and she had a tendency to like, I have a sister, two sisters, and a brother that still live out there in California, and she kind of was like a, come on out to California, it's really nice. Like, come hang out, come hang out. And you know, me and actually one of my other brothers who don't live there anymore, we went out there for a while and stayed there. So I went out there for a summer, and it was good. Like it was a really good experience. So then I went home, and in some ways that probably triggered more dysfunction because now I kind of had a taste for like almost like a different life, like with more freedom and like just a taste for like not having this kind of
Monotony.
it wasn't even monotony. It was like
You had more options.
I had more. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I had more options, and I like the way the rules were in the house growing up with my stepmom. Like it wasn't. It was weird. So like I was always a little bit tense. Like I really wasn't real sure where things were going. That was my perspective. Like I wasn't real sure what I was going to be getting into because it wasn't. There was something weird about it. And so when I went out there, like there was like a more things to do and a sense of normalcy. So like there was like oh okay, like this is kind of cool. Like I feel relaxed. So then I go home after getting a taste of that, and like things just snowballed. Like things just got really difficult at home for my. And how'd that work? So, excuse me. So that would have been between my 8th and ninth grade because it was my 10th grade was the first time that I was actually going to school out there. So the next summer after ninth grade was whenever I finally left and went to live in California. So basically, like we did the experiment in the summer. That was good. I went home for my school year in ninth grade. Things just got weirder, and like it just became more evident that I needed to get out of my living situation where I was at home. And so then my sister talked my dad into saying, "We'll just let him come out here and live for a little bit if he wants." And that turned into basically like 2.5 years. And I would have graduated. I mean, I would have graduated in California at a small town north of San Diego if it wasn't for my drug addiction. So halfway through my senior year, I'm just being confronted, and it was time for me to go. Like I had to, you know, I just didn't have an option. I had to come home.
You left California with the addiction? It was just cut cold turkey?
Kind of. I mean, I never did crystal meth again after I left California. So that was the last time I did crystal meth. And I knew and understood, in spite of the fact that my pride was hurt, I understood that this was the opportunity for my life to change. So, like, at this point, I don't even remember, like, but I'm sure that I had gotten high within the month before I came home. Like, I'm sure I had used at least a couple times before. Like, the good benefit of being a teenage drug addict and you're broke is that as much as you want to get high, like you just can't afford it. You know, so it was like I was kind of, you know, I was preserved in that way.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like I got my hands on plenty of it, way more than I ever should have.
Yeah.
but like there was a little bit of a self-regulation just because it was like, hey, I was a teenager. Not everybody would be willing to sell stuff to a teenager,
Yeah.
and I didn't have the money to buy it even
Yeah.
if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So it was like it was always by like hook or by crook that you would get it. So by the time the writing was on the wall that I was going home, I myself was actively trying to like not like trying to change my circumstance so that I wasn't tempted. So whenever
What was it? I didn't mean to cut you off, but your dad, how did he receive you?
that's a good question. He was actually, I mean, my perspective was it was actually pretty cool. Like I mean, he gave me an ultimatum. Like when I came home, like when I left, my sister basically sat me down and said, "Here's an airplane ticket. You're going home. Your dad knows what's going on." Like basically, I had a talk with our dad, and he knows what's happened, and he has a plan. I'll let him explain it to you, kind of thing. Like, but you know, like you're not going home with a blank slate. You're going home to deal with this. So then when I get home, my dad basically sits me down and gives me the other side of the ultimatum, where he completes the message and basically says, "You're first off, you're going to go get examined. So you're going to go talk to a psychologist, and you're going to explain to them where you are in your addiction and what's going on with it. And you can live under my house, under my roof. You can graduate high school, and all that will be working fine. But the moment," and I was 18 at the time, "the moment we find out that you're doing drugs again, you're out. Like we'll just literally kick you out of the house." And knowing him and understanding how he dealt with my other brothers and sisters, he wouldn't have hesitated. Like I wouldn't have been disowned. It would have been like, "You're welcome, but you don't live here," kind of situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he would have taken a hard line. So I took that seriously. One of the
It's a loving dad.
yeah. I mean, he was practical, like love. Yeah, definitely loving, but like I mean, he was just dealing with what was in front of him, kind of. And I had a thought and I lost it. But yeah, what I was gonna say, I think one of the things that I've always had is that in spite of whatever things I try to get away with in my life or have tried to get away with in my life, for whatever reason, I've always had like this kind of innate respect for authority. So, like if somebody's an authority figure in my life, whether it's at my job or whether it's a church or whether it's in, my family, like it's always come naturally to me that if somebody in authority is like directing me or telling me what to do, like I listen. So, I mean, like I'd still do my own thing, but when it came to the confrontation, like I would understand reason when it was presented to me. So I took it really seriously that when he told me something was up and he was gonna, act on something if I did something wrong, like I either get really good at hiding it,
Yeah.
or I listen.
Yeah. And so you listened.
So I listened.
So you went and got examined psychologically.
Yeah, I went and got a psychological exam. And basically, I mean, it was like a therapist that was just, that was one of his things. Like he would talk to people that were addicted to drugs and try to figure out where their headspace was. And I didn't even meet with him that many times. This was kind of an interesting story because even by the time I was first going to see him, I, even at the time, felt the impact of the resolution in myself. Like I wasn't a Christian yet. I hadn't, that God was like the last thing I was thinking about. But I had like this internal resolution that if I'm gonna live a normal life, like I have to take this opportunity seriously. And in so many words, I think I explained that to the therapist, and I think we had like 2 or 3 sessions. I think we went down there. I forget what it was.
The therapist was just basically like, okay, he's
well, yeah. So, and that actually concerned that actually concerned my family because it was like, are you sure? Like, are you sure he can
yeah.
handle this?
Yeah.
And he didn't write me off. He wanted to meet with me on a regular basis, and I think it was after a couple months, like there was finally like I was the one that cut the string, where I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to keep going to the NA meetings, and I'm going to keep doing that. But I said, if your prescription for me to come in here is now contingent on whether I want to keep doing it, I'm going to stop doing it. Like, I'm not going to go back to this. And he was like, you don't want to do that. He's like, I've seen a lot of people in your situation where they think they've got this under control and they revert back, like without the therapy, without the help, they end up going back, which you might have been telling the truth, but I'm like, I was thinking to myself, like, he wants me to turn him into a crutch. And I didn't want that. Like, I want to stand up on my own. And you know, by that point in time, I was working 2 jobs. So like, I was working at this gas station in town, and I was working at an auto body shop. So like, at that point in time, and I was going to school. And like, you want to hear something crazy? So the school I went to in California was, I don't know if it still is, but like it was a pretty high graded. It was a pretty high graded school. So like, they were ahead of other schools. So by the time I got into my senior year, I was skipping class, and I was just doing everything wrong, and my grades suffered. So I never had great grades because I just didn't care. But like, my not so great grades went to D's and F's, and I was cutting class all the time. So here I am failing almost everything, and it's December. It's December of 1994, and I'm going home. So now, like, I don't even know if I'm going to graduate. Like, I honestly have no clue if I'm going to be able to graduate from high school, which was embarrassing enough on its own. And I get in front of the guidance counselor, and I show them my records, and like, here are the classes that I've taken. Here's what I've taken. It's like, oh, it's like, yeah, this school is like way ahead of us. Like, some of these classes that you have, you don't even need them to graduate. Like, these classes that you're failing, like, you don't even need them.
These count for 5, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like,
Technically, you graduated 2 years ago.
well, that was crazy. So basically, I'm like, and I wasn't even I was being very realistic with them. And what I mean by that is, like, I am not here to like try to become the debate club champion.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not trying to like join extracurricular things. Like, I really just want to graduate. Like, tell me what is the minimum I need to do so that when I am done in May, that I actually can get my cap and gown and graduate. So like, okay, like, they get it. Well, you really only need these two classes. So realistically, you can just come to school for half a day and you could graduate. And the classes I had to take were actually similar to classes I'd already taken. So like, I breezed through. So like, I literally went from D's and F's at the first half of the year up till December in 1994 to C's and B's, mostly C's, in the second half of the class. And I only had to go to class half a day. And the rest of the time I was working at the gas station or going sweeping floors at this auto body shop. And like, I just got busy. Well, I will say, like, the one thing that was kind of noteworthy whenever I first came home was the fact that everybody knew I was a drug addict. So everybody in the school, everybody talked. It was a small school. So like, everybody who knew me knew what was going on and why I came home.
And you never touched drugs again after getting back home?
Well, no, that's not true. Like, weed. Like,
well,
yeah.
Heroin, right?
Yeah, but
I mean,
not
you weren't heroin. You were meth,
no,
right?
yeah, meth.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I never touched any hard stuff again. Like, I knew, at that point, I was very aware of the distinction between things that were potentially problematic and things that, like, you know, people should avoid if they have an addictive personality, like alcohol and weed, versus like there's like a really distinct line between heroin, meth,
Yeah.
cocaine.
Yeah.
Like those things will wreck your life
Yeah.
big time. Not to say the other stuff can't, but it's like,
Did your dad know about the weed?
no. I think he would have flipped out.
That
And-
would
but-
have that
but
would
the
have been
thing
just
is,
as
I would say that it wasn't even that I was doing weed though. Like it was something that I would have done on occasion. Like there wasn't like, oh, like I'm
a
still
day, yeah.
like I'm filling in this empty void with marijuana.
yeah.
Like it wasn't like that. It was just like I didn't have a conviction to completely avoid it
Yeah.
at that point in my life.
Yeah. And
Same
then
with
coming
same
from
with-
meth, you're
Yeah,
like
same
okay,
with
this is-
alcohol.
yeah.
Like alcohol was like, and it's kind of weird because I feel comfortable talking about it like this, but it was like it was just different,
Yeah.
you know, and it ferreted itself out
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. But you were saying that. Oh, sorry. Your friends and everyone knew why you got what happened.
Oh yeah, so you know, rightly so, and I'll tell this to people when it comes to having a drug addiction or having a lifestyle choice that is bad. I'm just as convinced that the substance or the bad habit isn't really the bad part. It's the affiliation. So, like, if you decide you want to become a pothead, and someone says, "Well, I can control being a pothead," but especially in cases where it's illegal or unseemly, like your pursuit of that substance or your pursuit of that activity is going to put you in the orbit of people that you don't want to be around. So like the hardest aspect of me trying to get clean while I lived in California, like, and I did, like, I didn't want to, who wants to be a meth addict, right? Like you want to get clean because it tortures your mind. And it, you know, like it's just, you know, it's not good for you. Like when your heart's racing, when you're just sitting still, you know, you're abusing your body. So like there was always in the entire time frame, I was always trying to negotiate with myself how I would get out of it. And the reality was, it's like the people that were your friends because they were drug addicts. So like by the time you were bored enough to get out and do anything, the most convenient people to hang out with were your drug buddies. And you know, like I remember having conversations with groups of people where it's like, hey, we all got to quit doing these drugs. Like these are bad for us. Like these are like, you know, we're killing ourselves. And then like the next week you forget about that conversation. It's like, hey, look what I got.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, is that, you know, is that, well, how many grams is that? And all of a sudden, you know, you're doing it again. It's like, oh, this is the last time.
Yeah.
This is the last time. We're done doing it. And so when I came home, and I'm really taking a long way to answer your question, but when I got home, the people that I should be around, they didn't want to be around me, rightfully so. Like, you know, I was, you know, the people that you shouldn't be hanging out with, that was me. And then the people that knew about my past that did drugs, they were like, ooh, he's cool. So like that was one of the first tensions that I had to deal with before I graduated, was that I had to come to grips with the fact that I had to be okay being alone. I had to be okay like not having real strong relationships for a while. And that's why I just poured myself into my work. And the cool part too about that is like, you know, this is one of the things that people that are having a hard time finding jobs and like getting going in their lives, it's like one of the best benefits of having a job, I don't care what that job is. Like it doesn't matter. One of the best benefits of that job is that you get around people that are a peer group and they're doing the same thing you're doing.
Yeah. They're trying to make a living.
Yeah.
They got a routine.
They probably have the same struggles. I mean, they're you know, if it's not the greatest job in the world, it almost doesn't matter. They all have the same struggles and they're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Adam. I just gotta call my wife really quick.
No problem. You want me to pause it?
Sure. Please. Thank you.
Yeah.